This video is brought to you by Squarespace. So recently I've been seeing a lot of art creators and streamers start using these cool 2D rigged character models called VTubers. Typically, from what I understand, people use a program called Live 2D to create complex animation rigging from 2D illustrations that's controlled by motion capture software to very cool effects. And it's all captured live from you, and it can be so animated and engaging, and I want one. But they look entirely too difficult to rig with my current level of knowledge, and I don't really feel like crunching to accomplish that in a week right now. I still fully intend on making one of these in the future, but for now, let's do some baby steps. Enter PNGTubers, the less complex baby cousin of the VTuber that uses PNG images and voice-activated toggling to create motion and change expression. Seems promising enough. The only problem is, I'm not a streamer, and I don't really intend on using this character asset much while directly recording in OBS. Instead, I want to use it for talking in transitional sections in my videos after audio has already been pre-recorded, or when I don't feel like physically being on camera. So given how I want to use this asset for my personal purposes, I'm gonna have to get a little bit creative. But first, before we get into the technical side of things and I attempt to wrap my brain around my convoluted methods, for the character design itself, I basically want this character to be my avatar, nothing too fancy, so I want her to be based off my channel art with just a few updates. Those updates would be to simplify the stylization a little bit, to make the animation process easier because my usual style is a little bit more on the painterly side. And some of those changes are going to be more of a character design nature to come up with a more compelling, all-encompassing look. So obviously, as always, I first took to Pinterest to gather all of my ideas. For my mood boards on this one, I didn't go too terribly crazy since I already have a sense of direction for my character design. I mostly just have some stylization references for the art, some general poses that I could consider putting my PNGTuber in. I've got a lot of possible color palettes to reference to really make the lighting on my final art pop. Lots and lots of tutorials for PNGTubers and VTubers in general. And I also have my actual channel art saved on here, as well as the reference sheet for my arcane self-insert because I think this character design is going to be a pretty big foundation for my PNGTuber. I also have a YouTube playlist full of different VTuber, PNGTuber tutorials because even though I am going the PNG route, I still kind of want to see the methods of what other people use, see if I can adapt them into my animation workflow a little bit. They've just been a good reference for the process even though I'm not going to be animating this in Live 2D.
So the first thing I did was just start doodling some poses and gestures and start brainstorming a little bit for the stylization of my character. Here I was just trying to figure out how to simplify my art style a little bit but still make it recognizable my art style, and I also decided not to do a reference sheet for this PNGTuber because I just didn't find it necessary. I had some good references for my avatar already, and I mostly wanted her clothing and accessories to be based on things that I personally own anyways, so here I was also just doing a little bit of brainstorming for outfit styling and hairstyling and what kind of accessories and iconography for my channel I wanted to carry over into this. Here was also when I made the decision to basically make two of these in this video because I've seen other people have one full body and then one more of a bust up to use for different purposes, and I thought that was a cool idea just to give myself even more variety, although that does mean that I'm effectively doubling my workload on this project. I wouldn't have it any other way. Anyways, with some brainstorming out of the way, I can begin working on the actual character art.
But before we get going, if you're creating art like this, you probably have a pretty big art gallery overall, and if you don't already have one, you probably need a portfolio. And you can easily create and maintain one using this video's sponsor, Squarespace. My portfolio site has become my go-to place to post my art online because I can have galleries for every single type of art that I do in one place. Not only can you easily get started by choosing from dozens of flexible website and portfolio templates that allow you to customize things like text, colors, and site graphics, but you can also create custom pages for whatever brand elements you want to showcase. For me, that's often different portfolios for my various work, whether that's digital illustration, costume and clothing design, or more crafting adjacent arts like sculpting. I can even create dedicated portfolio galleries for a particular project to show the development and finished product in more detail. Plus, I can keep any of these galleries updated with the click of a button because tools like automatic image scaling will make sure my pieces are always arranged in an appealing way. And since selling prints and other merchandise often goes hand in hand with art creation, Squarespace also offers online stores that can be hosted right alongside your portfolio site, and they provide all the tools you could possibly need to sell services or products like built-in inventory management, shipping, fulfillment, and more. And with a wide range of accepted payment options, means purchasing is always made simple for you and your customers. So if you'd like to create a portfolio to showcase your work or a store to sell your wares, you can head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, head to squarespace.com/pricklyalpaca to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much as always to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to it.
Getting into the actual character art for my models, I decided to start with the thigh up model because I knew it wouldn't take me quite as long, and I wanted to use it for testing purposes before I fully committed to my methods, but we'll get into that a little bit later. The artwork for these honestly didn't end up differing too much from my original style. I did just reduce the amount of detail in the painterly stage whenever I was working on these, and I also definitely leaned more into anime stylization and proportion since I feel like that's a little bit more appealing for a sprite like this. My typical style definitely leans a lot more semi-realistic, and for an avatar like this, I just don't think that's as fun. My stylization and drawing methods here mostly differed in number one, how much I relied on line art whenever I was making these, and number two, in how I utilized layers. I definitely leaned way more into line art for these sprites than I normally do because it helped everything to stay a lot cleaner and more organized, and that was definitely helpful for how I dealt with layers on this project because similar to how people do whenever they make actual live 2D VTuber models, I split pretty much every element that I could up into individual layers so that I would have as much control over everything as I could in post-production. That means the outside of my character's jacket was one layer, her torso and shoulders were one layer, each individual arm and sleeve were separate layers, her hair was a layer, her head was a layer, her facial features were separate. You get the idea. That of course also corresponded to the flat colors on a layer below the line art, and from there I basically colored everything about as normal as I usually would with a little bit less detail, also utilizing a lot of gradients and a lot of the airbrush tool, and whenever I was adding little details like jewelry, I also made sure to do all of that on separate layers. At this point, I pretty much had a usable model, or at least usable enough to do my tests, which I am not going to show you at this point in the video. At this point, I still fully intended to add lighting and shading to this model, but not before getting distracted by the full body model, which I intended to pour slightly more effort into. For the full body version, I started with a little hunched over artist sketch of myself sitting on a pillow, and I quickly started to multiply my layers by doing the line art for different sections on different layers like I did on the thigh up version. Pillow was a separate layer, the main body was a separate layer, arms, face, sleeves, even the long hair was its own separate layer. Once I was done, I went ahead and selected the flat colors for each layer, but at this point the amount of line art and layers got even more intense because at this point I got the idea to add a line boil to each and every section of line art, and to do so in an animation loop of 3 different frames, which means redrawing the line art 3 different times. For anyone curious as to why someone would put themselves through such an act of masochism, this is mostly just a stylistic choice to add a little bit more motion. It gives a smooth, jittery animated effect and kind of makes it look like each frame is hand-drawn. You can also do a line boil with 2 different jittering frames. In fact, I think that's more traditional, but I like the smooth look of 3 different frames, and I kind of wanted to see what this would look like. Did this take years off of my life? Yes. But I actually got it done faster than I thought I would, and before I knew it, I was moving on to flat colors again. And I did these the exact same way I did in the thigh up version, and in fact, color picked them directly from that version. Nothing too fancy going on here, just generally trying to make it look good and add a little bit of depth here and there. But the real fun began whenever I decided to add some intense blue rim lighting, and because I haven't quite kicked my masochistic tendencies, I decided to add a 3-frame loop on the rim light as well. This again, fortunately, was not as bad as I thought it would be, especially since I chose kind of a painterly simplified style for the rim light. Once I was done with that, I also complemented it with some simplified cell shading on a multiply layer. When the cell shading was done, I also went back in on that locked multiply layer and added a saturated terminator at the edge of all of the shading. It tends to add just a little bit more life to cool tone cell shading. And once I was finished with the shading, I went in and began drawing different mouth shapes for lip syncing, which, sorry to disappoint, is not a technique that I ended up using in the final model for this. I originally toyed with the idea of doing some lip sync in the editing stage and immediately decided not to upon trying it because it is way more trouble than it's worth to do manually. That's a pipe dream I'll have to return to whenever I actually try rigging a VTuber model. While I was at it though, I did move on to drawing a bunch of different expression combinations, mostly just drawing various eyebrows, eyes, and mouths that I might need for different expressions, along with a couple of different iris positions. And from here, I should be able to use these in combination to create a bunch bunch of different expression variations. Near the end of working on this model, I decided that the arms didn't have enough movement just being in the static position holding the pen in the sketchbook, so I decided to draw out a couple of extra hand gestures so that she could have just a little bit more emotion with her hands. I personally talk with my hands a lot, so it feels very fitting. I did one variation where she's holding her hand out with the pen still in it, and one with her pointing while grasping the pen, and I feel like these three modes together give some pretty good gesture variation, but I could always go back in and draw a few more in the future if I really want to. Near the end, I also completely forgot to add my sunglasses to the model, so I quickly took care of that, and now that the full body model's finally done— Oh, yeah. I really cannot believe that I didn't think about adding Tiger whenever I was working on my concept sketches, so I quickly went in at the end and added her floating on a pillow in loaf mode in all her executive producer glory. And getting back into finishing up the thigh-up model, first it was time to deal with the egregious exclusion of the executive producer on the first draft, so I started by sketching out and coloring in a few different expressions of Tiger so that she can emote right along with me. I also added in my braids since I had neglected to do that the first time around. And I also added in another hand gesture to give the model a little bit more expressiveness. Then it was time to add a little bit of shading. I did this just with very basic cell shading and a little bit of blending here and there. Again, I did this individually on each layer, and I also went in individually on each layer and added in some blue rim lighting to give the model a little bit more depth and color, along with some subtle magenta lighting on the left side. Finally, it was time to add in expressions like I drew on the full body model. I redrew similar eye and eyebrow combinations to match the range of expressions that I did on the full body model, but then since both had a similar head angle, I just copy pasted all of the mouths that I drew on the full body model onto this model, manually repositioned them so that they would look decent enough, and thankfully that did the trick because I did not feel like redrawing all of those mouths again. Finally, I added a little bit more expression range to Tiger, including a head turn, and with that, my thigh-up model is done, except wait, no, it wasn't, because I forgot to redraw the other frames for the rim lighting to give it a similar jitter effect that I did on the full body model, so I ended up going in later and finishing that up, but thankfully it didn't take too long. Now that the art is completely done, the next step is to export everything, which is a process that takes quite a long time. I saved pretty much every section of the body as individual PNG files so that I would have as much control over it in the editing and compositing process as I possibly could, and this meant 3 times as many files for the full body models since I animated the lines for them 3 times, and I also gave the lighting a 3-frame jitter. I even saved the default facial features as separate layers so that I would have the most control over them that I could, but whenever it came to the range of expressions, there was just too many possibilities, so I did save the entire expression on one layer, and since I drew an absolutely massive combination of eyes, eyebrows, and mouths, I basically went about saving the expressions as just turning on whichever layers I thought suited the expression the best, saving common expressions and mouth shapes in combination, and then just going ham with saving as many different expression combinations that I could possibly think of. This resulted in a whopping 71 different expressions for the full body and 61 different expressions for the bust, which will probably give me more than enough variety for my purposes. But I do like the fact that whenever I need to, I could just go back into the same file and create custom expressions for my editing. Both of these models honestly have tons of potential for me to add on to them in the future, and I think I even created them with enough detail that I could start using them to learn live 2D if I wanted to.
Alright, we now have our model art done and plenty of cool animation loops and layers to work with, but without OBS or other voice-activated software, how the heck am I going to use this thing? Well, as the foreshadowing at the beginning of the video implied, enter Davinci Resolve, my editing software of choice.
I have used these little YouTuber characters in the past. Usually you just use a sequence of PNGs and transition between them to make it a little bit more visually interesting, but this usually doesn't offer much movement or animation capabilities, especially since I want to add some jitters and little animation extras, and also potentially use some layers with this character model. So my goal here is to essentially create some animation presets that I can edit between to create more movement without having to manually put animations in sequence every time I use them. And I also need to figure out a way to easily change expressions. And my first idea for a good way to do all of this was to export animations as GIFs. To test my theory, I took an old PNG model that I had and strung a couple of different frames together, tried to export that as a GIF, and then dropped it back into Davinci Resolve. This worked, but unfortunately a huge problem with this method is that it lacked a transparent background. I I could try to use a green screen background instead, but that's way too much work. So I went online to see if Google could solve my problem. And it actually looked like I could use PNG sequences instead, since they actually retain transparency. So I gave that export method a shot, dragged the many frames back into Davinci Resolve, and when you do that, it not only retains transparency, but it also creates a single clip. Thankfully, that's exactly what I need these files to do. I'll just need to remember to keep each folder separate for different PNG sequences so that I can easily drag and drop them into my software whenever I'm editing, and they don't get mixed up with each other. The next step of the process is timing and compositing my preset animations in Davinci Resolve using the files that I drew earlier, and for that, here's Technical Kira.
Hello there, and welcome to my convoluted Davinci Resolve file where behind the scenes I've been trying to make all of this stuff work. So this is the first sort of test that I did, and I did this before I even finished like the bust up, thigh up model. And here I'm just trying to figure out how to sort of make the model breathe and jitter sort of in the way that live 2D models do. Because I feel like that's just going to make it more lively, more animated than just having like a static PNG like I've used in the past. And basically what I've settled on is just using a camera shake effect, but on a really low setting so that it just has a slight movement to it. I tend to use this already on like static images in my videos just to give them like a little bit more bounciness, a little bit more rhythm. So I have basically taken all the individual exported PNGs that I had from before, and I have applied a very minimal camera shake effect to each one of them. This is basically the effect that you can get out of doing that. It's pretty subtle overall, but I think it gives it more of like a sprite quality that you would see in like a video game or something, which I think is pretty cool. So moving along in my brainstorming, my methods changed a little bit whenever I got to the sitting model because I had to worry about animating the jitter for every layer since I actually redrew the line art for every single layer, which without lighting or shading on it, looks a little something like this. Here I'm using that same camera shake effect to make everything kind of like bob independently, which I think is pretty cool. And that model, once I added shading to it and everything, ended up looking a little bit like this. So you actually get a jitter on the line art, a jitter on the shading itself, everything's sort of like floating and bobbing around and pretty decent for the most part. But of course with this model, you might be noticing that I can't exactly change expressions very easily because this is all one file on one layer, and how am I gonna get those expressions in there? My solution for that is to essentially use this model at about 3 to 4 layers. That way I can still change out the expressions, but I don't have to use all of these layers all the time because this would be not only super annoying to try to like individually rig every time I use it, it would also probably crash my computer. But first, before I get into all of that, if you're curious how I got here with the frame jitter and the lighting and everything, like I said earlier, I saved individual PNG files with each different frame of like the lines and lighting. There's no like movie magic there, it's just something I drew by hand, and it's a little tedious and annoying. So what I did then, I'll use this little pillow as an example, is I took those PNGs and then just dragged them directly into Davinci Resolve. And if you've seen my animatic videos or my animation videos, this will sound a little familiar to you, but I basically took that individual file and I just turned it into a single PNG image that's like sort of short, turned them into a frame, and then I took the other frames, pasted them in, making them the exact same length as the first frame. And then once you get like a 3-frame sequence here that runs together, all I did there was take them and paste it a crazy amount of times just to get a good length sequence. And then when you play it back, you end up with something a little bit like this. You get the animation sort of looping and you get that jitter that makes it look a little bit more hand-drawn, a little bit more like snappy. And then from there, all I did was select the entire length, click create new compound clip, and now you've got an entire clip of that looping animation that you can move around, you can do whatever you want to, and that means you can also apply effects to the entire thing. So I just take a camera shake effect, drag it over, slap it on here, and whenever I go up here and adjust it, I usually just kind of go low, and then once I get like a baseline, I can adjust it from there, but I'll turn it up a little bit so you can see it. But I added my camera shake effect so that I can kind of get that motion to it. And you play it back, the pillow looks like it's it's floating in midair. Look at that, beautiful. And if I scroll over here, that's what all of this is. These are all of the individual frames without being merged, just playing back all at once. Most of these just have a camera shake applied to them with varied levels. That way I can get some of them to like move independently and some of them move together. Like for example, the body and the head and facial features, some of those move together in sequence and have the exact same settings. Then for example, the pillow down here has a different level of camera shake to it so that it looks like it's moving a little bit more independently from the rest of the sprite. Gives it a little bit more variation. I think I did the same thing to the hair as well. But then I also went in here just to have a little fun, make it look more visually interesting. I added a few more effects to anything that was metallic. You can see like a slight flash happening like on the earrings and some of the jewelry here. And that's just because I added like a little bit of a flicker addition filter here, where if I turn it up, you can like really see the earrings having like a big reflective quality to them. I turned it down pretty low on here, but that's just like another extra I did to add a tiny bit more movement. Not super necessary, but I thought that it was like fun and again, visually interesting. So how I'm going to get this to work to actually be able to change expressions and use it in videos and stuff, I have a file here just with each like individual element in sequence. And right now each one has like a different hand gesture going on so that I can use these as presets. All I'm going to do is take this default set here and it's already like timed and animated. I'm just going to take away the glasses layer and the bangs layer, as well as all of the facial elements. And then I can just save this layer exactly how it is so that I have the base that everything else is going to go on top of. So next I'm going to take these bases without the bangs, facial features, or glasses and render them out individually as PNG sequences. Okay, so now I've got all of the individual elements of my full body sprite saved in a folder. So I have like the 3 different poses here. I can just drag those out into a file. You do that, it creates like a new individual clip. So here I've got clips for each sort of hand gesture. So I got these preloaded so I can toggle between these whenever I want to. And then on separate layers, I have the hair, I have the glasses here. And if I really don't feel like messing with those 2 individual layers, I also have a render that has both hair and glasses, which might honestly be a lot more practical sometimes, we'll see. And last but not least, we of course cannot forget Miss Tiger floating on her pillow. Look at that, absolutely adorable. I do have Tiger on her individual layer so that I can like move her around wherever I want, but my collection of layers here makes it so that I can have like 4 layers basically, and underneath these top 2 layers, if I want to change expressions, all I have to do is go into my folder here of all of these pre-rigged expressions, and then I can just drag expressions in underneath these top 2 layers. And then as I'm using them in videos, I can edit between all of this and I can change expressions as frequently as I want to. And I can also toggle between these super easily, and that should make it so that I can use these with like minimal manual editing within a video. I feel like this is a pretty good amount of editing for having as much motion as I do in these files. And I can also select all of this and I can kind of like move my character around. If I want to have her on one side of the screen, I can move Tiger over here. I can have everything still aligned and still work as intended. So pretty cool, pretty easy to use, and I can just like paste this stuff in any video that I'm working on and just basically change out expressions as needed. So now that I have all of that figured out, I still haven't really rigged this like waist up, thigh up model at all. So let me go work on that. I'll apply all of the animations and jitters and everything that I did to the full body model already. After that, I'll be back with the final result and I'll show you guys how these models work in action.
welcome to the end of the video, and welcome to my finished current PNGTuber models. I think that both of these honestly turned out really cool, especially with the limitations that I was working with, since I have to use these in editing software, and it's a little awkward because I can't actually toggle between frames and use like voice activated stuff, which it would be cool to figure out how to use that in OBS to record a little bit, but this works a little bit better for my current workflow, so I think what I came up with this week works just fine for now. Honestly, if I pour any more time into this, it would probably be most worth it to actually learn how to use Live 2D and actually try to rig a real VTuber. I'm just such a big fan of animation that I think learning Live 2D and digging into that software will be worth it, even though I can feel the years of life that process would inevitably drain from me. For now though, I think this is definitely a great first step. I set out this week sort of with the goal to make these in order to make my life a little bit easier whenever I'm editing videos and I don't feel like trying to find B-roll, or I don't feel like physically being on camera after recording my initial intro, which is honestly most of the time. Anyways, if you enjoy this and you want to see me conquer trying to rig an actual VTuber model, please comment below. I'm honestly probably gonna do it anyways, but I definitely would appreciate the encouragement. Also, if anyone has any other clever ideas for rigging this in Davinci Resolve and adding more movement and just anything to make this current model function better, I am definitely open to feedback there. But finally, thank you so much for watching this video, especially if you watched till the end, especially if you made it through all of the technical bits of this process. But as always, the biggest thank you for this video and every single one of my videos goes to my patrons and especially my executive producers. My name is A, Inferno, Miss Fenris, Koichucks, Becca, Mandolin, Cyrus Orion, Jenny Craftsma, IDTKD, Ren, Bandolph the Yellow, Cloud Max, Marita Wasner, Velly Smelly, Stabby Horse, Shihibi on my GB Stellai Ember Creeps, Cardia X, Lunira, Fiasco, Mossy Raven, Honolulu Biscuit Giver, Lula Hana, I'm not saying that name on the internet, ABW Makes, Ice Kavan, A Wendu, Liana, Ermler Jean, Brian, Phoenix, PNG Not Found, Freedom and Gus Gus, Cat, Dodo, Zyle S, Agent Sketchy, Thea Maia, Lovisa, Eloquent Silence, Hypnos, Katie, Sweet Winter Garden, Gravity Drop, I Hang Out with Cats at Parties, and Bean the Bread.